Good evening, everybody. I'm Susan M. Hart-Savidio from the Rutgers Cooperative Extension in Ocean County, and tonight we are uh, bringing you In the Know to Grow about bats, facts about bats in New Jersey with Kathleen Kerwin from Rutgers. And with me tonight also is Patty Dixon, horticulturist at the Ocean County office. We have a few of you guys on, so if you can, questions, you can put them in the chat. We'll try to keep the little chit chat back and forth a little off if you're talking in between each other. Oh, and I have a friend. She decided to say hello. The cats always love it when they come up. We also have a program on for next month in the office. It's in person. It's November 14th from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. and it's basic seed sowing and seedling care. So if you'd like to register for that, it's a free program, but it is in person, so you would have to come to Ocean County for that one. So you'll can always send us an email or send us a chat, and we'll get the information over to you. Otherwise, that we'll be sending out probably next week through Teresa Becker as well through the office. So without further ado, welcome Kathleen, and let's find out what kind of bats are around.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And perfect time of season to talk about bats with Halloween coming up. But hopefully, by the end of this, if you have any fears about bats, hopefully you won't. But first off, we'll talk just very generally about bat biology and ecology and some different species that you can find around the world. And then we'll dive into more specifics about New Jersey and what species you can find here. And then we'll end with talking about bat houses and what to do if you have a bat in your own house and you're trying to get it out. All right, so first off, bats are mammals, just like we are. So there's a few qualities that mammals have that we all share in common. If we were in person, I'd ask you guys what you thought they were, but that's okay. So number one is hair. All mammals have hair or fur. We don't have feathers, scales, or anything like that. Bats are hairy just like us. Bats have mammary glands, so they give birth to live young and they do breastfeed. That's how they feed their young. Again, just like us. And here's a picture on the top of a bat. So when we catch bats for research during the summer, we want to know if they're male or female, and then we'll also want to know if they gave birth that summer. And one way to do that is to check their mammary glands, and you can see if the hair is all worn away here, you know that that bat has a baby somewhere that it has been feeding. So that's how you can kind of check if they've given birth. They're the only mammal capable of true flight. So you might have heard of a flying squirrel, which we do have in New Jersey. But flying squirrels don't actually fly. They have a flap of skin on the side of their body. And in order to get from one tree to another, they might climb to the top of the tree and then glide. So they'll jump off the tree and then expand that skin and glide downward, but they can't actually fly. So bats are the only mammal that can actually fly. There are a ton of bats in the world, so over 1,300 species that live around the world. This makes up a fifth of all mammal species. The only other group of mammals that has more diversity are the rodents. So things like, mice and rats and that sort of thing. When it comes to the US, there are 47 species, and then in New Jersey, we have 9. This is one of my favorite photos. So this bat is found in the Philippines, but it really shows the structure of a bat wing. So the taxonomic order of bats is called Chiroptera, and that literally translates into hand wing. So this is very different than how birds evolved how to fly. So with birds, all of their finger bones are kind of fused together. And then their feathers kind of come off of those fused finger bones and their forearms. And the feathers is what allows them to get flight. With bats, it's quite the opposite. So if you look closely at the bone structure in these wings, it is just their finger bones that are very elongated. So you have the upper arm, the lower arm, the appendage that kind of sticks up at the top on each side. That's their thumb. And then moving down, you have their pointer finger, middle finger, ring finger, pinky finger. So all of those finger bones have elongated, and then between them is a very thin membrane of skin that stretches out, and then that makes up their wing. That's how they're able to fly. Bats are found throughout the world, basically everywhere except the far north. So everywhere in the orange, that dark orange color of this map, you can find bat species, and they provide vital ecological function. In our case, in New Jersey, all of our bats are eating insects, which is true of many bats around the world. They're also important pollinators. The bats that are going for nectar will be pollinating different flowers. And they're also important for seed dispersal. So bats that are eating fruit will poop out those fruits, and the seeds will grow. And that's how many plants, rely on getting around and spreading. So bats are very important. Here's just a few examples of some species. So this is the same species that we saw in the previous photo. This picture is a little misleading. It's like when you take a photo of a fish you just caught and you kind of hold it out in front of you to make it look bigger. But this bat is very big. It has about a 5-foot wingspan. Luckily, they're just eating fruit, so they're nothing to be scared about. They're highly endangered, but they're a huge bat. Like, it's hard to imagine seeing one of those flying overhead. It's called the giant golden mantled flying fox. So even bigger than what I said, 5.5-foot wingspan. Compare that to the bumblebee bat, which weighs less than a penny and lives in Thailand. And these guys are eating insects. You can kind of see the difference in their face structures. So the bats that rely on fruit for food, they have more of a dog-like appearance. And that's because they're using their nose to find that ripe fruit in the landscape. So that they have that long snout to accommodate all those like nerves for their nose. Whereas these smaller bats that have more of a smushed face, they are going after insects, and they do that by echolocating, which we'll talk more about later, but that's why they have more of a smushed face. They're not relying on their noses as much as these, some might say they're cuter, flying foxes, but I think the insect-eating bats are just as cute. There are some weird species out there, so some of them are highly specialized, like this guy, the fringe-lipped bat. He'll hunt for frogs in Central and South America, which is pretty cool. And then this bat is called the lesser long-nosed bat. And for any of the adults in the audience that might enjoy tequila once in a while, you can thank this bat for the tequila, because tequila comes from agave plants, and agave plants have a very specialized relationship with these bats. So the agave flower will actually only open at night, and it relies on bats for pollination. They won't open it during the day so that nothing else during the day might pollinate them or might feed from them. So the bat has this specialized long tongue. It'll go in to the flower, it'll drink the nectar using its tongue, and then as it comes out, it can be totally covered in the pollen of the agave plant. And as it goes from flower to flower, it's pollinating it. So pretty cool relationship. Any questions so far?
Sorry,
Out of
nothing.
the, oh,
Nothing
Go
yet?
ahead, Patty.
yeah, nothing yet. No.
Okay, no problem. I'll stop, every section. If anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and happy to answer them as we go. Okay, so now we will talk about some myths and misconceptions, at least some of the major ones that surround bats. So this is a common one. Can bats suck your blood? And this is where we get the myth of vampires. It's kind of a Halloween association. But the answer is Not in the United States, luckily. Out of 1,300 species that can be found around the world, only 3 of them have evolved this trait to rely on feeding on blood. And usually they're going after birds or livestock. They are found in Central and South America. This is just one example, which is the hairy-legged vampire bat. It might be a little hard to see, but on this picture on the right, you can see a chicken. If you look closely, right below its foot, you'll see one of those vampire bats that is drinking the blood from the foot. You can see that this chicken looks totally unbothered. It's because the saliva of these vampire bats has special enzymes in it that basically like can numb the foot and also make the blood flow really quickly. So they have these razor sharp incisors teeth that will cut a very sharp injury in the foot, and then they'll get that blood out. So it's not even really bothering the animal, but you don't want it to happen to you. Okay, so are bats blind? No, bats actually have really good vision, and they can see basically as good as we can, but they rely on echolocation to find prey at night. And the way echolocation works is the bats are emitting a really high frequency sound wave, and the sound wave is such a high frequency that humans can't even hear it, but it's really loud. The sound that they emit is so loud, it would be equivalent to a smoke detector going off a foot from your ear. It would be like damaging to the eardrum. And it can be damaging to the bat's eardrum. So they have evolved a way to actually deafen themselves right before they emit these really high frequency loud noises. And then they undeafen themselves as they wait for that sound wave to hit an object and reflect back. And they have these specialized ears that can then hear those sound waves come back. And through this process, it's amazing. They can figure out texture. They can figure out if something's moving. They can figure out how big it is. And this is how they get around the night sky and have become a very, very efficient predators to insects, at least for our species that eat insects. So really amazing. It's good that we don't hear it because it would make the nighttime sky very loud. But that's how they get around. And the reason bats are nocturnal probably is so that they don't have to compete with birds, because so many birds during the day are eating insects. So by being nocturnal, by being active at night, they don't have to compete with birds for that food resource. Bats are also prey to certain bird species, such as hawks or owls. So again, by being out at night, they're a little less vulnerable to being eaten by predators. Rabies. So this is probably the number one thing people associate bats with is rabies. And there's good reason to be concerned, but luckily not every single bat carries rabies. A very small percentage of bats in New Jersey carry rabies. Our best guess is that probably less than 1% of bats carry rabies. And on average, 2 people in the US die from contact with a rabid bat. Rabid bats are seldom aggressive. The disease will often kill them. And rabies is transferred through contact with saliva. So you have to get bit or scratched by an infected animal in order to contract the disease. So the reason bats are so associated with rabies is that you're more likely to come in contact with a bat inside your house than you are with, say, a raccoon or any other animal. And we'll talk about that later, about how bats can get inside of your house. But any wild animal, any wild mammal can carry rabies. But again, you're more likely to be touching a bat. If you find a bat in your bedroom, if you're not wearing gloves, maybe you just grab it, it bites you. That's how a lot of these contacts like occur. But again, you have to be bit or scratched. So if you find a bat in your living room, and you absolutely know that it did not bite or scratch you or anyone in your house, you can simply open the doors, open the windows, lower the lights. It's best to stay in the room with the bat so that you can see it leave. Or if you can capture it somehow, just make sure you're wearing like very heavy leather gloves. But if there's any question at all that you might have been exposed, that the bat might have bit or scratched you, rabies is very serious. It's 100% fatal. So if you've had that type of like encounter with any wild animal, you should go to the hospital right away to get rabies vaccinations. Luckily, there's a vaccine. You have to get a few of them, but it totally prevents any rabies infection from happening. So why should we care about bats? Well, for one, at least for the insect eaters, they're really the only major predator of night flying insects. So they're providing a huge ecosystem service by removing a lot of these insects from the environment, and a lot of them can be considered pest species, especially for our farmers, agricultural world. They're just really, really keeping the insect numbers down. As just an example, so big brown bats are, or let's see, sorry, a summer colony of 1,000 bats. So this might be a little brown or big brown bat, which is a common species in New Jersey. Say they each weigh about 10 grams each. If you add that up, because they can eat up to their weight in insects every night, especially female bats that are lactating during the summertime. They have a huge caloric need. So if they're eating their weight every single night, that can equal 22 pounds of insects that are removed just from that one colony of bats every single night. So it's kind of amazing to think about just the quantity of insects that are getting removed from the environment by bats. This was a study done back in 2011, so these numbers are a little outdated, but the study looked at the economic importance of bats in agriculture, and this really just measured the decreased use of pesticides because bats are in the environment. So the amount of money saved by not using pesticides equaled about $23 billion to the agricultural industry per year. So that's a huge amount of money, and again, probably even more now in today's numbers. All right, any questions before we head into more specifics about New Jersey bats?
Yes, there was a question about, Andy had a question about fruit and vampire bats who don't eat insects. Do they not have echolocation, or do all bats have echolocation?
Not all bats have echolocation. So yeah, it's really the ones that are hunting insects. The fruit bats are more relying on their sense of smell, and then they can also see. So yeah, but I believe not every single species has that ability.
And okay, and the other question is if bats carry dangerous viruses to others when vampire bats feed on other animals, don't the bats then pass on the viruses to other animals?
Yes, that definitely can happen, and I believe it is an issue with livestock and even with people, with bats passing, with vampire bats transmitting disease. I don't know a ton about that, but it's definitely a way that they can transmit disease, and it can be an issue. So luckily, we don't have those here.
Luckily, we don't. Okay, that was it.
Okay, cool. Okay, so now more specifically looking at the species that we have in New Jersey. So we have 9 species, like I mentioned earlier. Just going to quickly talk about each one. Generally, our 9 species can be broken up into 2 categories. So we have our year-long residents, which are also known as our cave bats. The other group is migratory, and we call them our tree bats. The names are a little misleading because all of our bat species, all 9, will utilize trees, especially during the summertime. This kind of more refers to what they're doing in the winter. But we'll start off with our 6 year-long residents. So the first two are the little brown bat and the big brown bat. These two both of them used to be our most common species here in New Jersey. Unfortunately, the little brown bat populations are way down due to a disease called white nose syndrome, which we will talk about later. And now big brown bats are definitely our most common species that we find around the state. They're also the species you're most likely to find in your house. Both of these species are adapted to living in people's houses, but again, since there's less little browns around, you're more likely to see a big brown that's like in your attic or somewhere else in your house. This is just a size comparison. I took this photo in the winter time many years ago where we had a big brown bat and a little brown bat hibernating next to each other. So common names for bats are not very creative. Obviously, the big brown bat is a bigger brown bat than the little brown bat, which is smaller in size, about half the weight. If you see these metal armbands, that's a way for scientists to keep track of bats. These bands are issued by different state, game agencies. They have a very unique number kind of printed on there, stamped in there. And then it's just a cuff that gets put around the forearm bone of the wing. It doesn't hurt the bat at all. It can slide back and forth. And then that way, during winter surveys, you can collect bats, read the armband, and know exactly, go back to your database, know exactly when that bat was banded, know approximately how old it might be and how many years you've been tracking it. And it's just a good way to keep track of them. Moving on to 2 more species. So we have the northern long-eared bat and the Indiana bat. You guessed it, the long-eared bats have longer than usual ears. Indiana bats are pretty identical. They just have smaller ears. If you compare an Indiana bat to a little brown bat, one of the only differences is that the little brown bat has hairier toes, which you would only know if you had it in your hand looking at it. So it's many times these bats look very similar. Unfortunately, both of these species are listed as federally endangered. The Indiana bat was listed back in the 1970s due to habitat loss, and the northern long-eared bat was more recently listed just a few years ago, again due to white nose syndrome, which affects all of these species pretty negatively. The last 2 of our year-long residents are the eastern small-footed bat. That's our smallest species. Besides having small feet, they also have kind of a darker face mask around their muzzle, which you can kind of see in that photograph. And then the tricolored bat, which looks the most different than any of the other of these 6. They have more of a reddish fur tone, but they're all similar in size and appearance. And again, these bats, these 6 species they're in New Jersey all year round. They're awake during the summertime and they hibernate in caves or mines or crevices or your attic during the wintertime. Moving on to our migratory bats. So we have 3 species. They're all listed here. These species look the most unique. So we have our silver-haired bat, our red bat, it's actually the eastern red bat, and then a hoary bat. So these 3 bats will leave New Jersey for the wintertime and go to more southern climates. The silver-haired and the red bat will hibernate, but the hoary bat, which is our biggest bat, is actually a long-distance migrant and will go very far south and hang out the winter somewhere far enough south where they still have food resources for the whole year, and then they'll come back in the summer. Any questions about those species?
We didn't have any specific questions about those species, but we did have a question about any evidence of other bat species moving north due to climate change.
That's a great question. There is a species called the evening bat, which is brown and looks just like the others. And we are getting some records of it. I don't know exactly what their range is, but I do believe it's more farther south than here. So that might be, climate change might be why, one of the reasons why that's happening. But I don't know for sure. But the evening bat is definitely a bat that is making more of an appearance in New Jersey. So we'll see, I guess, with time,
Yeah.
if it's becomes more permanent.
We did have one question come into the office through email asking about the silver bat, the
Mm-hmm.
silver hair bat,
Yep.
that they live on a 12th floor story and there was a silver bat on their balcony. Should they put a bat box up or anything? But since it's migratory, would you just let them do their thing?
Yeah, so they're highly unlikely to use a bat box. It probably was just resting there for the day, and then as it was traveling through. But they're all of those migratory bats really rely on forests. Like you're not rarely, if ever, gonna find one of those species like in your house or using a bat house or anything like that. They're all in the trees.
One more question did come in. Where do the red bats live when not in New Jersey?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I don't know exactly how far south they go. I just think they go far enough so it's a little milder of a winter than here, but I'm not sure how far. But that's a good question. I'll have to look that up.
All right, that's it for now.
Okay. All right, so now we'll go into the life cycle of a New Jersey bat. So what they're doing, we'll break it up by season. And talk about what they're doing each season of the year. So we'll start with autumn, which is where we are now. So bats arrive where they're going to hibernate. So this is, especially true of our 6-year-long residents. They'll arrive where they're going to hibernate, and that's when they mate. That's the only time of year where males and females are congregating all together. It's right before they go into hibernation, and then this behavior is called swarming. And then they delay fertilization, so the females actually don't become pregnant until the spring. And then they have their gestation period, and then they give birth in the springtime. And then basically, once they wake up from hibernation, the males and females go their separate ways. They don't see each other again or interact much until autumn comes. So during the winter time, they are, again, either hibernating or going south. In the case of the hoary bat, it's going far enough south that it's not hibernating. They have to do that because there's no insects available in the wintertime. So it's the same with many of our bird species that rely on insects. They have to leave. And then in the bat's case, they have a choice. They can either hibernate or migrate. Some species will hibernate in caves and mines, like we talked about. Others will utilize man-made structures. So big brown bats, which is the most common species you might find in your house, they are known to use attics or barns to hibernate inside. Others might use hollow trees. Here's a bat that's circled in yellow here. It's hard to see, but that's an eastern red bat that's tucked into some leaf litter. So probably not the safest place to be sleeping, but that's one example. They will bury themselves into leaf litter. And then here's a photo of a little brown bat, which was taken by a Rutgers intern many years ago from Hibernia mine, which we'll talk about, but that's a spot in North Jersey where many of our little brown bats will spend the winter time. And that's just condensation that's formed on the bat. Their body temperatures get very, very low. Basically, everything shuts down. They will wake up occasionally throughout the winter to use the bathroom, fly around. But for the most part, they are just there, very still, very quiet. And then you can see that blue band on their arm. So again, that's just the identification number, so we can keep track of these populations. This is Hibernia Mine. It's in Rockaway, New Jersey. It's gated off now because people were going in there to hang out, and it's not a very safe place. but it was operating pre-Revolutionary War. It was used to get iron out of, and it was operating up until the 70s. Once it shut down, it quickly became a very popular spot for little brown bats to hibernate. Here's a photo on the right of kind of what it looks like inside, which is a very straight tunnel. And bats will just roost up all on the edges of the walls and the ceilings. They'll hide in little holes, and that's where they hang out all wintertime. And it's the perfect place for them. It's humid, it's cold, it's a very constant temperature, which is just perfect for bats. So this is a spot where scientists in the wintertime, again, can go in. Since all of these bats are very concentrated in the wintertime, it's a good time to kind of do a count, figure out how many are there, read those band numbers, and just keep track. Once they disperse in the springtime, it's really hard to do that because they travel many, many miles all over the state or out of state to spend their summers. So winter is a good time to do bat research. Moving into spring and summer, several of our species, including the big brown, the little brown, the northern long-eared, they will form what we call maternity colonies. So they wake up from hibernation, the females become pregnant, and they move on in groups to wherever they're going to spend their spring and summer. And females will give birth all at the same time, usually in May, late May or early June. Baby bats are called pups, and typically they're having one pup. Some species are more likely to have twins. And these pups are born. At first, they're very helpless. They're blind. They're naked. It takes them only about a month, though, after birth to be able to fly. So during this period, the colony is very vulnerable because these babies can't move. So this is the most sensitive time for these bats. The picture in the middle is a bat house, but looking up. And you can kind of see all these little faces looking down at you. That is a colony of big brown bats. And it just shows you how many can squeeze inside of a bat house. They really like to be in these tight, warm spaces. It's safer, it's warmer, it's a good spot for them to have their pups. And on the right, these are just examples of big brown pups, what they look like at various ages, but they're smaller, they're not as hairy, they're just very little. Males do bachelor things all summer. So if you find a single, brown bat in your house or on a tree or something like that, it's most likely a male that's just there for the day, or you might spend a few days there and then move around. The females form these larger groups. So if you do have more than a handful of bats somewhere, then it's most likely a maternity colony of one of these species. Any questions about that?
Yeah, we got some questions about,
Okay.
I gotta go back here. So first off, how long do they stay pregnant?
Great question. I should know that. I think it's about a month. I don't think it's very long. But yeah, they delay fertilization until they're basically waking up, and then they give birth in May. So probably about a month. But I'll have to check on that.
Okay, so that was another question. So like somehow they're holding on to sperm before they fertilize.
Exactly. So they're able to store it through the winter time. And I believe bears do the same thing. It's just an adaptive strategy so that they're not pregnant, all winter long when they're hibernating or going, it's called torpor,
Yeah.
type of hibernation.
Yes. We also had a question about hibernation. Do they return to the same place to hibernate?
Yes. So they definitely do. In Hibernia, that mine, there's bats banded there from like over 10 years ago. So it's cool. They were banded there 10 years ago. They've been seen, like maybe not every year because you're not able to read every single band from every bat. But yeah, it's a good way again, to keep track of populations, but they are very loyal to where they hibernate. They're very loyal to where they form colonies in the summertime. Like once a group of females finds a place that they like, they will return every single year. So bats are smart. They are very loyal to these spots that they pick to spend each season.
So now we have a bunch of people wanting to know how long they live.
Great question. Bats can live a very long time,
Oh.
like up to 25 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they probably, most of them probably don't live that long, but they are a long-lived species. They can live to be very old. Again, we find banded bats that are well over 10 years old. So it's the opposite life cycle of like a mouse. So a mouse will live 2 years and have multiple litters of like dozens of babies.
Uh-huh.
Whereas a bat lives a long time, but puts a lot of energy into reproduction with that one pup every year, which makes them more vulnerable because if that one pup doesn't survive, they have to wait an entire year to try again. So it can take them a long time for their populations to get bigger.
So I have a question actually. So you said the pups can't move. So after they're born for that month, are they just like clinging on to the mom, or is the mom holding on to them, or
Yeah, so they can crawl around. They just can't fly.
okay.
So most of the times the moms will leave the pups, leave the babies in their roosting location like at night, and the moms will go off at dusk. They'll feed. They might return every once in a while throughout the night to feed their pups, and then they'll keep going out to hunt for insects. I believe some species can hold on to their babies and fly, but it's most of the time they're just leaving the pup behind, which I've seen during a research project. I was out at night at a farm that had a bat house, and I looked up real quick into it with a flashlight, and it was just full of pups, which was like a little alarming because they're cute, but they're also, when it's late at night and you're seeing 100 of them, it's just funny. So it was like a nursery, like they were all just hanging out waiting for their moms to come back.
It's kind of cute though.
Yeah, super cute.
Just two more. How long do females reproduce?
What do you mean?
Like are they reproducing from age 1 to 10, or like?
Got it. Yeah, yes, absolutely. So it's basically impossible. Once the bat leaves the pup phase, they're called a juvenile. But by fall, so that same exact year, it's almost impossible to tell the difference between an adult bat and one that was born that year. So they reach maturity very quickly, and then the following spring they would be giving birth, and then I believe they would continue to, reproduce every year until they die.
Okay. There's more coming. Should we keep going?
Yeah,
Well, I was
sure.
gonna say there's two more questions that came in, but somebody did ask about where can you see the bats all at once out west, and I know in Austin, Texas, there's a bat bridge, but I don't know if there's anywhere else.
Yeah, I think Texas is most known for those big, huge colonies. I went once to Bracken Cave, which is outside San Antonio, and it's like millions of bats. It takes hours for them to leave the cave during the summertime, just because there's so many of them. They like have to wait. So yeah, that's definitely check out. There's spots in Texas where it's an unbelievable amount of bats that are living in one place.
So cool.
Okay. I think there's two questions, but I think we can we could wait we could wait. And I see a couple people are putting other things in the
Cool.
chat there. So
yeah, I'm sure there's more examples out west. But yeah, they form these huge colonies.
Yeah.
All right, so now we'll just talk a little bit about managing forests for bats. So this is important for landowners. If anyone happens to own forested land, or for professionals that are managing forests, here are just a few tips. So almost all of our North American bats rely on forests for their survival. And many of our species rely on what we call snags. So snag refers to a big dead tree. Well, it doesn't have to be big, but any tree that is dead that hasn't fallen over is called a snag. And snags are hugely important, not just for bats, but also many birds. There are dozens and dozens of bird species here in North America that also rely on snags because they can find these cavities where they can form these safe areas where they can nest, they can rest, they can give birth. So big dead trees are very important, and it's something that we kind of lack. And it makes sense if you have a big dead tree next to your house, that's an issue. You can't have it there; it might fall on your house and cause an issue. But back when we had way more of a forested landscape, a few hundred years ago, we would have had just more mature forests. Lightning strikes would kill a tree, or they would die of old age. So you'd have more snags throughout the landscape, which would provide this really critical habitat. Some of our bats, though, like the red bat here on the left, don't actually go inside of a cavity of a dead tree. They will just roost among the foliage, and it's amazing how they blend in. And we did a study 2 summers ago where we put radio trackers on these red bats and we tracked them to individual trees, and we knew that they were in a certain tree, and we would stare at the tree with binoculars for like an hour just trying to figure out if we could find where the bat actually was, and we would never be able to find it. They blend in so well. And some species will go under bark. So as a tree dies, their bark starts to kind of slough off, forming these nice little niche like microclimates where bats can kind of hang out. If you happen to have forested property or you're managing forested property, you can actually increase the amount of snags that are in your woods. I am not saying to go out and start killing a bunch of trees, but a good rule of thumb is to have 3 to 4 snags per acre. So if you have a larger, older tree, maybe it's not doing well, you can kind of help it along and basically create a huge living snag, as long as, again, it's not going to be any issue with falling on your property, like any structures on your property or anyone else's property. But by girdling a tree, so basically removing a layer of bark all around it, that will kill the tree and then, again, create a huge benefit to so many species of wildlife, not just bats. The bigger the tree for the snag, the better, probably because it's better at retaining heat. Bats, especially the ones that are giving birth, require these hot places that retain heat because, again, their pups are born naked and helpless. So they really like these warm spots where they can raise their babies. Another species, or this species in particular, that has a good reputation for bat habitat, it's called the shagbark hickory tree. And for whatever reason, this tree has evolved to have bark that's really shaggy. It's like peeling off at all times, which really kind of mimics how a dead tree would look. So if you're trying to increase bat habitat in your forests, this is a great species to plant. It's kind of a slow growing tree, and it's also very messy, so I wouldn't recommend it for like your front yard in a suburban neighborhood. But again, if you have more property and you don't mind this type of tree, it's called a shagbark hickory, and it's very beneficial. Any quick questions, or should I continue?
I'll get the 2 that were left from the last
Okay.
round. Is there any difference between male and females in strength?
Strength? I don't think so. They're very, very. I don't think there's any dimorphism. Like they're the same weight, same size. Like you can't tell if it's a male or female unless you're holding it.
All right. And then if the mom doesn't come back when they're feeding, will other females feed the orphan baby?
Good question. I don't think so. Not that I'm aware of. but it does happen. So the biggest threat to these baby bats is if they fall. So kind of unrelated to the question, but it's made me think of it. If a baby bat falls out of the roost, the female bat has no way of picking it up from the ground. So if you happen to have a bat house on your property, or you know where there's a bat like colony roosting, and it happens every summer, you might find a baby bat on the ground. And if it's still alive, the best thing to do is, if you can, get it up as close as possible to where it was roosting, and just put it right back up there, and then the mom will come back to it. But that's probably the highest cause of mortality for these baby bats, is that they fall and then they can't get back up. So that's one piece of advice if you see a baby bat on the ground in the summertime.
Yep, there's a couple of things in the chat there people can read to see where else you can see bats. There's a bat cam as well. But one last question from Laura. You had said that the bats return to the same place every year as our New Jersey bats. But what about migratory bats? Do they ever return to the same place again?
I believe so. I believe all these species are very loyal to where they go every single year. And so I don't know as much about the migratory species. A lot of the work that we do focuses on the cave bats. But it's, yeah, they're amazing. Like they know exactly where they're going. They know where they like to go. If they get kicked out of one spot, they probably know of some other alternative spot they can go to nearby. So they have very good like spatial memory. And again, they're very loyal to where they like to be.
Okay. And then I'm going to kind of let you go through the end because we're getting close, and then we'll get through these questions after that.
Okay, cool. So threats to bats. Number one is wind energy, unfortunately. So wind energy, a lot of the wind turbines and the wind farms are put up in these migratory areas. So these tree bats that move long distances. It's actually the number one cause of mass mortality of bats around the world. And not only can they hit the turbines, but actually what happens is when they're near the turbines that are moving, there's a sudden change in air pressure that can cause internal damage to the bat. There's a ton of research going on how to prevent this, because obviously it's like, trying to get some more clean energy out there. We don't want it to be detrimental to wildlife. So there's a lot of research by engineers, biologists trying to figure out how to prevent this from happening. One thing we can do is that if, when there's low wind and you're not generating much energy anyway, if we can slow these turbines down, low wind is when bats are most active. So if there can be some compromise where we don't have the turbines active during these low wind periods, we can really help reduce bat mortality. But there's all sorts of other innovative techniques getting developed. So it's kind of it's an ongoing issue, but people are very worried about it. And then white nose syndrome, I mentioned earlier. So white nose syndrome is our biggest threat here in New Jersey to bats, and really it's spreading across the country, but it's very bad all along the East Coast. It's a fungus that came by accident from Europe in 2006. So probably what happened was this fungus is native to Europe and Asia. There's a lot of people that like to go into caves and mines to like look around and hang out. So maybe someone was in Europe, went into a cave, had the fungus on them, came back to New York, and that's how it got spread. That's our best guess. We don't know exactly how it got here. But once it did get here, it caused extreme population declines, like unbelievably. 95 to 99% of decline in some populations. So I mentioned how a lot of research goes on in the wintertime to study bats. And so it was New York, the biologists were going in for their yearly surveys, and they realized that something was not right. Bats were awake, bats were just dying in piles outside in the snow. This picture's from Pennsylvania. And then they were noticing that the bats had this white muzzle, and that's where the name white nose syndrome comes from. That's just the fungus that's growing on the bats. And then the bat, when it wakes up due to this fungus, its immune system kicks in and it starts attacking the fungus, which is growing all over the skin of the bat. And it's actually the immune response that causes these giant holes in the wings. And it just caused this huge mass mortality. And unfortunately, once white nose is present in a cave or a mine, there's no way to get rid of it. It's there forever. You can't just bleach a cave because there's so many other organisms that live there that are beneficial. So it's a real problem. Here's just a spread, map of the spread. So you can see this red circle up in New York. That was 2006. It started to quickly spread to the surrounding areas. Once it got a foothold in the Appalachian Mountains, it really just went south and started marching its way west as the years went by. It did make a huge jump to Washington State back in 2016. So it did make its way west, probably because of people transporting it by accident. But there were a lot of regulations put in place to try to stop the spread. A lot of the caves that were open for tourism were either shut down, or they had these bleach buckets where you'd have to decontaminate after visiting the cave, so that you weren't spreading the fungus to new places with your shoes or equipment. So it's been a real struggle. Certain species are affected more than others. We don't, our little browns have been devastated, but our big browns don't seem to really be affected, even though they do get the fungus. So there's a lot we could talk about with that, but I do want to keep going. Maybe we'll save our white nose questions to the end if you have any. So bats in buildings. So again, little brown and big brown are two most common species that you're going to find in a man-made structure. And it makes sense. If you're a bat that forms these maternity colonies, you want somewhere that's warm, that's safe. You're not going to get rained on. It's going to be really hot. So an attic is the best place possible for that, which is why they decided that that's where they really like to be. So not great for us, but good for the bats. These are just some examples of how bats can get into your house. Eaves, soffit vents, torn window screens, chimney caps that might be missing. They'll get behind shutters. Basically anywhere there's a space that they can squeeze through. Luckily, bats don't chew and they don't scratch, so they're not like a squirrel that's going to force their way in. They'll only utilize spaces that already exist. So if your house is totally sealed up appropriately, there's no way that the bats can get in. But once they can find a space, they'll utilize it. In New Jersey, all of our species are protected under the Endangered Non-Game Species Conservation Act. So you cannot kill, hunt, harass a bat in any way. You cannot use glue traps or fly traps specifically for bats. That would be illegal. So luckily we have these laws in place. Many states don't, but our bats are completely protected from any harassment. The only way to get bats permanently out of your house, if you have them roosting, is to perform what's called an exclusion. So these types of exclusions are done by wildlife control companies. And this is the basic process. You have to figure out the primary place that bats are utilizing. Usually you can figure that out by doing an inspection. Bats poop a lot, so oftentimes there will be staining on the side of your house where they're going in and out from. You can do a survey at night. So stand outside your house around dusk and just watch and see if you can find out where these bats are leaving from. That's a great way to figure out where that primary entrance is. And then once you figure out where the primary spot is, you can then seal up any secondary crack or crevice, and then put what we call a one-way device at that primary exit and entrance for at least 1 week. And this allows bats to leave but not get back in. There's many ways you can do this. People use cones, tubes, mesh is very popular. So having this mesh on the bottom photo, it's open at the bottom, so these bats can all drop out and fly away, but they can't get back inside. So leaving that up for at least a week ensures that every bat has left, and then you can seal everything up. So in New Jersey, we have very specific dates where you are allowed to do this process. You have the entire month of April, and then you have from August 1st to October 15th. This protects bats from when they're hibernating in the winter, and it protects them when they're giving birth in the summer. It's very, very difficult to know if you have bats hibernating in your attic because they're not making noise, they're not pooping, they're probably squeezed in some crack somewhere. So if you do an exclusion and you seal everything up in the middle of the winter, you could potentially be trapping in all those hibernating bats and they would die. Same thing in the summertime. If you do an exclusion in May or June or July, if you put up that one-way device, the adults would be able to leave, but not the pups if they can't fly yet. So again, you'd be trapping them all inside. So waiting till August 1st is safe. This is when you have a pretty long window to get the job done. And there are some exceptions if there's some sort of threat to public safety or health, but that exception would have to be made by the Department of Health, and New Jersey Fish and Wildlife would also get involved in that case. In most of the times, it's totally fine just to wait until this safe period, which we've just left. So if you do think you might have bats, you would have to wait till April 1st to then get this exclusion process done. Part of my job is running a bat house program. So I answer questions all the time about bat houses, and we do install them for people. So we've learned a lot over the years, but bat houses can be great, especially for these bats that are getting kicked out of people's attics. So they're mostly utilized by the big brown bat species that we talked about. But basic requirements for a bat house: placement should be about 12 feet high at least. So we generally aim for the second story of a building if we're putting it up on a building. Getting 6 to 8 hours of sunlight is good, and free from obstruction. So not having any tree limbs covering it or any telephone wires or anything like that. This can shade out the bat house, but also harbor predators like hawks or owls. So not having any obstruction is the best. And then if you have water source nearby, within a quarter mile, it seems, that will increase your chances of bats. So this is usually pretty shocking when I tell people, but the actual best place for a bat house is on a building, which can be really counterintuitive, especially for people that are trying to get bats out of their house. They most of the time don't want a bat house on their building, which is understandable. But through our research and other organizations, bat houses on buildings work by far the best. Probably because they're nice and insulated. They're not blowing in the wind like if they're up on a pole. And for whatever reason, they really seem to not work when you put them on a tree, which again seems weird because so many bats rely on trees, but I guess they would just rather use the natural tree and the tree cavities than the actual bat house put on the tree. If the tree has limbs on it, it could be shading the bat house, it could be harboring predators. But usually our most successful bat houses are the ones on structures, especially if you're getting that exclusion work done. So here are some examples of bat houses that we've installed, and all of these houses had bats in the attic or in the barn, and then we put up the bat house. Unfortunately, putting up a bat house only is not going to convince bats to leave your attic or wherever else they're roosting. Again, they're so loyal to where they go. They're already comfy and cozy there. They're not going to see the bat house and go, ooh, I'd rather live there. You have to kick them out from where they want to be. And then the bat house provides kind of an alternative for them to go to once they are kicked out. If you just want to try to attract bats to your yard, Putting it up in the fall or winter is a good time. So that way in the spring, maybe you can find some female bats that are looking to start a new colony and they might move into your bat house. Or if you're getting an exclusion done and you want the bat house up, putting it up beforehand is best, at least a week or two if you can. That way, bats are curious. They'll know that it's there. Once they're kicked out of where they want to be, hopefully they move right in. Or if you're doing this in the fall, they might move on to wherever they hibernate and then they'll come back the following spring and move into the bat house. They won't hibernate in a bat house. They'll just use it during the summertime or spring and summer. And then there's no way to attract bats. So I've seen people like smear bat guano onto the bat house or like weird things like that, but there's no data to suggest that that works. The best thing you can do is just have an appropriate bat house, bigger the better. There's a lot of bat houses I've seen for sale in like different shops that are so small and really not constructed properly. You want to have a pretty big bat house if you're trying to attract a bat colony. So having a well-made bat house and then put in an appropriate place is the best you can do. If nothing's moved in a few years, you can try relocating it. But it's tricky. They're not, bat houses are harder to get to be successful than say bird houses. Just because I wish we could tell bats where to live, but they don't listen. All right, that was the end of my slides. So yeah, happy to take any questions. And there is a survey that will be in the chat and also emailed out. So I'd appreciate if you guys could take that. And thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, there was a lot of questions. I figured we'd wait to the end because a lot of them were about bat houses and bat. So Patty, if you can put the link in the chat. Oh, you got it. Okay. The question that somebody was asking about was how high do bats fly? Do you know? Is there an average, or how high is the highest bat? That's what.
That depends on the species. I don't know exact numbers, but like certain species are evolved to hunt and fly in more forested areas. Like the northern long-eared bat is more adapted for that. And so they have like certain characteristics that make them more agile and they can go in between trees and shrubs and things. And then species like the hoary bat, which is our biggest bat, I believe they're our highest flyers. So they're going to be like above the tree line. I don't know exactly how far above, but it just totally depends on the species and what type of hunting strategy that they're using and habitat.
Okay. And the one other question, and Patty, if you want to go for one, could you just reiterate specifically where the bat box placement? Somebody was asking whether it's north, south, west. I know that'll depend, and also somebody else that did ask about what type of tree. If you could just reiterate again, what's the best for bat houses?
Yeah, so we did a whole study looking at what factors made bat houses successful. We did not find that direction mattered at all. But if you were going to pick one, I would do whatever's going to get the morning sun. So when the morning sun hits it, it warms up nicely for the day. That's a good rule to follow. But again, with our study, we found the number one thing that made bat houses successful was putting them on a structure. And then number two was if you've had bats already present and you were getting them excluded, you had about an 80% chance of bats moving in. If you didn't have bats already and just put it on a building and it didn't matter which way it faced, you had about a 30% chance. And about a 0% chance for trees and like a 2% chance on a pole. Yeah.
A big difference. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I saw. Oh, you know what? If you find a bat that needs help, who would you contact?
Great question. If you Google New Jersey wildlife rehabbers, the first link I believe that comes up is a PDF list of wildlife rehabbers in the state that are licensed. Not all of them take bats. Some of them do. one of them, probably the most famous is the New Jersey Bat Sanctuary. That's Jackie Kashmir. She's out in Hunterdon County. So she rescues a lot of bats every year. Woodlands Wildlife Refuge will take bats. There's others. I believe Mercer County will also take them. But there's a whole list that you can find online. But that's the best way to go about it, and they can help you figure out what to do.
I think we could put that in when we send out the link to the recording, we can put that information in there. The
Definitely.
only other question I saw before the question Patty just asked, how can you discourage roosting behind external house shutters and when it's like a siding type thing?
Yeah, so they'll only use space that they can get to. So if you can put steel wool or some sort of mesh or some sort of barricade that they can't get through, then they won't be able to get behind like a shutter. But they can squeeze into some pretty tight spots, so you have to really be diligent about just making sure it's really tight. And then just be extra careful not to do that if there's already bats like roosting behind there. You don't want to, trap them inside. So I would wait till the fall or the winter or really early spring to do that type of work just to make sure, you're not trapping anything. But yeah, any sort of, physical material that you can put there to prevent them from getting in will help.
Yeah, seeing lots of thanks and
Yeah.
whatnot. I
I'm
don't know,
gonna
Patty,
put
do you have
the link for your survey up one more time, just so it's
at the
right
end?
there.
Thank you.
What a great talk, Kathleen. That
Yeah.
was just awesome. I learned so much, and I have bats flying around my house in the summer, so it's good to know a little bit about them, so I'm not scared.
Yeah, I do too. And I'm dying to know where they are coming from, like in my own yard. And I've had a bat house up for years with no luck yet, but we'll see.
And do you do any bat watching? Do you offer any bat watching nights? Is there any programs that you know of?
We do offer summer programming. Our most popular one is called a bat walk, and we'll go out at dusk and we do a whole presentation. We talk about bats. It's great for kids. And then as the sun goes down, we'll look for bats, and we have these little mini acoustic detectors that we plug into iPads, and they can actually hear the echolocation of the
Oh,
bats,
that's cool.
and that has a software where it tries to identify what species are flying. So we get hired by like libraries or cooperative extension. We've done it all over the state. So if you're interested, you can email me and we can try to set something up.
Excellent.
It's so fun. Yeah, that would be really fun.
Yeah, we had somebody said that their children were watching and they were so excited to get the information about the bats. So they were Richard was very ecstatic that his kids actually enjoyed it. And someone asked, do you ever see bats near the salt water? Are they really a lot at the coast or is it more inland?
There is, yeah, there's a lot of bats are extremely hard to study. I'll just say that. They can fly and they're out at night. So oh. I've been doing bat research for a long time, and it's always very frustrating. But and they're so small, you can't, they're too small to put a GPS on. You have to use these really small radio transmitters, and then actually physically go out and with an antenna and try and find them. And it's usually you have to be within a quarter mile to even pick up a signal. But there is some work being done. There was a graduate student in New York looking at places like Martha's Vineyard, like places along the coast where they were finding northern long-eared bats and like other like rare species. So they probably are there more than we know. I don't think they're really over the ocean, but they are in these like coastal communities.
Okay. So yeah, Richard put it in the chat that he wants to arrange a bat walk. So you said to email you,
Yep.
and maybe something could be set up, whether it's for a smaller, most likely it's for a bigger group, not necessarily a personal homeowner.
Yeah, like we do charge just to cover our time and travel, but yeah, usually it's like a bigger like anywhere from 10 to 40 people. And yeah, it's a great program. It's definitely our most popular. We also do camp programs like during the day. where we have like stations. We talk all about bat biology to kids. That doesn't have like the nighttime portion, but we have all sorts of education available.
Great. So great to
And
know.
yeah, I know we're over time. I just, one question, um, Zachary asked twice. Do you know what the most commonly found bat in the desert around Las Vegas, which one would be? I know
No,
it's not Jersey, but
yeah. Sorry, I don't know much about the Western species, but
okay.
there's a lot of diversity out there. It's
Yeah.
cool.
Okay. And then also, the information about the Bat House program, is that on the wildlife.rutgers.edu site?
Yep, you can find information there. You can email me directly, either way. There's also a wildlife email address that I'm the person behind. So if you email that, I'll be the one responding.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I want to thank, I think there may be some others. If we found some other questions in the chat tomorrow, we'll send them on your way if we need some answers. And thank you so much for coming on. Great talk, and kept everybody entertained as well as informed.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
Thank you.
but Patty, I'm thinking bat walk. I don't know. We
Yeah.
might have to see what we can arrange.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
So we'll keep you all abreast on that. So
Yeah.
just if you guys have any questions, you can email us. I will save the recording, and we will have it up. And sorry, Teresa will be sending that out sometime, probably next week, once we're all set. So thank you again, Kathleen. And Patty, any last words on? Nope.
Fill out Kathleen's survey, please. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Happy Halloween.
Happy
Yes,
Halloween.
happy Halloween. All right. Thank you
Thank
again. Lots
you.
of thank yous. All right. Thanks, Kathleen.
Awesome. Thank you.
Have a great night.
You too.
Yep.
Let's see.